Hi, it's Mark Donnigan with the Marketing Execution Podcast. To begin, a lot of founders believe competition is what keeps prices down and innovation moving, but Peter Thiel challenges that assumption in a big way. He makes the case that monopolies don't kill innovation, they enable it, which is why incremental gains rarely change outcomes. Following that point, I've spent decades working with enterprise tech teams, and I've seen firsthand how focusing on breakthroughs instead of marginal wins reshapes growth. For that reason, today's conversation breaks down Thiel's contrarian thinking and how it applies to startups trying to build something that truly matters.
Tune in, listen up, it's marketing time. Bright ideas sparking, blowing your mind. From strategies to big exec dreams, catch the buzz and join the execution. Marketing Convo.
Welcome to the Marketing Execution Podcast. This is the show for tech founders and leaders building B2B products and technologies. We show you how to go further, faster to get the business results you need.
From strategies to big exec dreams, catch the buzz and join the execution. Marketing Convo.
Mark, we talk so much about competition in startups, right? Like, how do you beat the other guy? How do you win market share? But I was reading through some of Peter Thiel's thinking, and he's basically saying that's all wrong, that competition itself is the problem.
Oh, you're going down the 0 to 1 rabbit hole. I love it. And yeah, Tim, this is one of those things that sounds contrarian just for the sake of being contrarian, but when you really sit with it, it's actually profound. Thiel's core argument is that competition destroys profits, period. If you're fighting for the same customers with the same product as 5 other companies, you're in a race to the bottom on price, and nobody wins that race except the customer.
Right, so the goal isn't to be better at the game everyone else is playing, it's to create a new game entirely.
Exactly. That's the 0 to 1 concept. Going from 0 to 1 means you're creating something that didn't exist before. You're not iterating, you're not making a slightly better version of what's already out there. You're inventing a category. And when you do that, you have a monopoly, at least temporarily.
Okay, but hold on. Monopoly is like a dirty word, right? People hear monopoly and they think of, robber barons jacking up prices.
Yeah, and that's the thing Thiel addresses head on. He distinguishes between 2 types of monopolies. There's the kind where you corner the market on something essential, like oil or steel back in the day, and you exploit that position. That's bad for society. But then there's the creative monopoly. That's when you build something so new, so different, that there's literally no one else offering it. You're not restricting supply of something people need, you're expanding what's possible. You're giving people options they never had before.
So a creative monopoly is actually good?
It's not just good. Thiel argues it's the only way to build something truly valuable. And here's the part that really stuck with me when I first encountered this idea. He says monopolies have the freedom to think about more than just survival. When you're locked in brutal competition, every dollar matters. You can't afford to pay your people well. You can't afford to invest in long-term R&D. You can't afford to care about your impact on the community. But when you have a monopoly, you have breathing room. You can actually build something meaningful.
I never thought about it that way. So the companies that seem the most generous or innovative
often have monopoly-like positions in their markets. Think about it. The companies that can afford to do the big, ambitious stuff, they're not fighting for scraps. They've carved out a space where they're the only real option.
Okay, so let's get practical here. I'm a founder listening to this on the Marketing Execution Podcast, and I'm thinking, great, I need a monopoly. But how do I actually build one? What does that look like?
So Thiel lays out these characteristics, and I think there are 3 that matter most for early-stage founders. First is proprietary technology. You need something that's genuinely hard to replicate, and not just a little better than what exists. He says 10 times better. If you're only 2 times better, that's not enough. Customers won't switch for a marginal improvement. You need to be so dramatically better that it's obvious.
10 times? That's a high bar.
It is, and that's intentional, because if you can hit that bar, you've created real distance between you and anyone who might try to copy you. The second thing is network effects. This is where the value of your product increases as more people use it. PayPal is the classic example. The more people who had PayPal accounts, the more useful it became for everyone. Once you hit a critical mass with network effects, you're almost impossible to displace. Because even if someone builds something better, they're starting from 0 users. Exactly. They can't compete with your network. And the third piece is economies of scale. Your product needs to get cheaper to deliver as you grow. Software is the perfect example. You build it once, and then selling the millionth copy costs basically nothing. That's why software companies can achieve these insane margins.
So if I'm checking my startup against this list, proprietary tech, network effects, economies of scale, if I'm missing one of those, I'm in trouble?
Well, you're not necessarily dead, but you're making your life a lot harder. And here's the thing that trips people up. Founders lie to themselves about this stuff. Thiel talks about how non-monopoly companies pretend they're unique by defining their market super narrowly. Like, oh, we're the only artisanal cold brew coffee shop in this specific neighborhood that's open past midnight. That's not a monopoly. That's a delusion.
I've definitely heard pitches like that.
We all have. And on the flip side, actual monopolies downplay their position. They say, oh, we're just a small player in this massive global market, because they don't want the regulatory scrutiny. So there's this weird dynamic where everyone's lying about their competitive position, just in opposite direction.
That's fascinating. So the real question isn't what market are you in? It's, do you have actual pricing power? Can you charge what you want without losing customers to alternatives?
That's the test. If you can raise prices and people stay, you might have something. If a 10% price increase sends customers running to competitors, you're in a commodity business, and that's a brutal place to be.
Mark, that's a lot to chew on. Let's pivot for a second and talk about timing, because Thiel also makes his point about how even great technology fails if the timing is wrong. What does that actually mean for a founder trying to figure out when to launch?
You know, that question about timing is something I think about a lot, because here's the uncomfortable truth. You can be right about everything, the technology, the market, the team, and still fail because you showed up at the wrong moment.
Yeah, and I think founders get this wrong in both directions, right? Too early, too late.
Exactly. So Thiel uses this comparison between microprocessors in the 70s and solar energy in the 2000s. And it's such a clean example. Microprocessors were advancing at this insane rate. Every year, they got dramatically better. So if you were building in that space, you were riding a wave that kept getting bigger. But solar, the technology was improving, sure, but incrementally, like 2% better each year, not 10 times better.
So all that investment money flooding into clean tech was essentially betting on a breakthrough that never came.
That's the painful part. Billions of dollars went into companies that were basically hoping the physics would cooperate. And look, I'm not saying solar is bad or that clean energy doesn't matter. It obviously does. But the timing question isn't about whether something should exist. It's about whether the conditions are right for it to succeed now.
Okay, so how does a founder actually evaluate this? Because it feels like you're asking him to predict the future.
Well, you kind of are, but there are signals you can look for. First, is your core technology improving rapidly? Not just your company's version of it, but the underlying science. If you're in a field where researchers are publishing breakthroughs every few months, that's a good sign. Second, is there infrastructure to support what you're building? PayPal worked partly because email was already everywhere. We didn't have to convince people to adopt email first.
So you're looking for tailwinds, essentially.
Right. And the third thing is market readiness. Are people actually feeling the pain your product solves? Or are you trying to convince them they should feel that pain? Because convincing people they have a problem they don't know about is really expensive.
That's interesting. So it's not just about the technology being ready, it's about the whole ecosystem being ready.
And here's what makes this tricky. Sometimes you can be too early in a way that looks exactly like being wrong. For instance, a company that tried to do video streaming in the late 90s. Great idea. Terrible timing. The bandwidth wasn't there. They burned through their funding and died. 5 years later, YouTube came along and became one of the biggest acquisitions in tech history.
So the first company wasn't wrong about the opportunity. They were just wrong about when.
And that's a brutal lesson, because from the outside, failure looks the same whether you are wrong or just early. Your investors don't get their money back either way.
So what do you do if you suspect you might be early?
You have to be honest about your burn rate and your runway. If you're early, you need to survive long enough for the market to catch up. That might mean raising more money, or it might mean finding a smaller niche that can sustain you while you wait. Some companies pivot to consulting or services just to stay alive until their core product makes sense.
Which brings up an interesting tension, because Thiel also talks about the importance of being the last mover, not just the first mover.
Oh, this is crucial. Everyone obsesses over first mover advantage. And yes, being first matters in markets with strong network effects. But what you really want is to make the last great move in your category. You want to be the company that figures it out so completely that nobody can displace you. Google wasn't the first search engine. Facebook wasn't the first social network, but they were the ones who got it right enough that they became the definitive version.
So first mover advantage is really just a means to an end.
It's a tactic, not a strategy. The strategy is dominance, and sometimes the best path to dominance is letting someone else make all the early mistakes, learning from them, and then executing better.
Which sounds great in theory, but requires a lot of patience and discipline.
And ego management, because watching someone else work on your idea is painful. But if you're genuinely building something 10 times better, their head start might not matter. The question is always whether you can leapfrog them before they figure out what you figured out.
This is really helpful, Mark. I feel like we've laid out the philosophical foundation here, the why behind all of this. But I'm curious, for founders listening right now, what does this actually look like in practice? How do you take these ideas about timing and monopoly and turn them into a concrete plan?
All right, first thing, before you do anything else, you gotta nail your secret. Remember we talked about Thiel's contrarian question? Here's how you actually find your answer. Grab a piece of paper, write down what everyone in your industry believes is true.
Like the conventional wisdom.
Then flip it. What's the opposite? And here's the key. Ask yourself, could that opposite actually be right? That's where you find your secret.
So, like if everyone says you need a huge sales team to sell enterprise software, maybe the secret is you don't.
That's literally what Atlassian figured out. They built a billion-dollar company with basically no salespeople. Everyone said you can't sell to enterprises without a sales team. They said, what if we just make the product so good that engineers tell their bosses to buy it?
And it worked.
It worked massively. So step 1, find your secret. Step 2 is to pick a tiny market you can dominate.
How tiny are we talking?
Smaller than you think. Look at what Stripe did. They didn't try to compete with PayPal on everything. They started with one narrow problem, making it easy for developers to accept payments online. That's it. Just developers, just payments, just online.
So they weren't trying to be everything to everyone.
No, and that's the trap. Founders love to say things like, we're going after the $100 billion market. But Thiel's point is, if you're going after a huge market, you'll get competing with everyone. You'll get crushed. So the move is to own a small pond first completely, then expand outward. Amazon started with books, just books. They dominated online book sales, then moved into music, then movies, then everything else. But they didn't start with everything else.
Okay, so I've got my secret. I've picked my tiny market. What's next?
Now you need to figure out if your timing's right. And here's a simple way to check. Ask yourself, is my core technology getting dramatically better every year? Not a little better, dramatically better.
Like 10 times better.
Right. Think about it like this. When Uber launched, smartphones were everywhere. GPS was accurate, mobile payments worked, all the pieces were in place. They didn't have to wait for the technology to catch up. So before you raise money, before you hire anyone, ask yourself honestly, are the conditions right for this to work now? That in 5 years, now.
This is really practical stuff, Mark. But let me push on something. How do you actually know if you have 10 times better technology? Like, how do you measure that?
Great question. Here's a framework I like. Can you do something that was literally impossible before? Or can you do something 10 times faster, 10 times cheaper, or 10 times more convenient? If you can't point to one of those, you probably don't have a real breakthrough.
Give me an example.
Google. When they launched, other search engines existed, but Google's results were so much better it felt like magic. You type something in and actually find what you wanted. That wasn't a 20% improvement. That was a completely different experience.
So it's not about being slightly better.
Slightly better gets you killed because established players will just copy you. You need to be so far ahead that catching up feels impossible.
All right, let's talk about the team piece. You mentioned earlier that founders need to know each other really well. But what about hiring those first employees?
This is crucial. Your first 10 hires will define your company's DNA forever. So here's what you do. Don't hire for skills first. Hire for belief in the mission first.
Because skills can be taught.
Skills can be taught, but you can't teach someone to care about your mission. When Thiel talks about the PayPal mafia, those guys weren't just talented. They were obsessed with the same vision. That's why they stayed close even after PayPal.
So the interview question isn't just, can you do this job?
The question is, why do you want to do this job at this company? And if they start talking about salary or perks first, that's a red flag.
What about the distribution piece? Because I think a lot of technical founders ignore this completely.
Oh, they absolutely do, and it kills them. Here's a simple rule. Your customer lifetime value has to be higher than your customer acquisition cost. If it costs you $500 to get a customer who only pays you $200 over their lifetime, you're dead.
So you have to know those numbers.
You have to obsess over those numbers and then pick your sales method accordingly. If you're selling enterprise deals worth $1 million, your CEO probably needs to be in the room. If you're selling a $20 app, you need viral marketing. There's no one size fits all.
Slack is a good example of the viral approach, right?
Perfect example. They made the product so useful that teams would adopt it on their own. Then those teams would tell other teams. Then the whole company would buy it. They didn't need a massive sales force because the product spread itself.
But that only works if the product is genuinely great.
Which brings us full circle. The product has to be 10 times better. The market has to be small enough to dominate. The timing has to be right. The team has to believe. And the distribution has to match your economics. Miss any one of those and you're probably in trouble.
No pressure.
Look, building a company is hard. Thiel doesn't pretend otherwise. But the founders who succeed aren't lucky. They're deliberate. They think through each of these pieces systematically.
And they're willing to be contrarian.
They have to be contrarian because if you're building something everyone agrees is a good idea, you're already competing with everyone else who had the same idea.
Mark, this has been incredibly helpful. We've covered so much ground today. The philosophy behind going from 0 to 1, the importance of monopolies, timing, secrets, team building, and distribution. Can you take a minute and tie it all together for our listeners? What's the big picture they should walk away with?
All right, let me bring this all together. Competition is actually the enemy. When you're fighting over the same customers with the same product, everyone loses. The goal is to build something so new that you're the only one doing it. That's a creative monopoly, and it's the only way to create real value. Then we talked about timing. You can have the right idea at the wrong moment and still fail. You need to ask whether your technology is improving fast enough, whether the infrastructure exists, and whether people actually feel the pain you're solving right now. And finally, find your secret by flipping conventional wisdom. Pick a tiny market you can completely own. Hire people who believe in your mission and make sure your distribution strategy matches your economics. None of this is easy, but the founders who win are the ones who think through each piece deliberately.
That's a lot to hold on to. So, Mark, after everything we've discussed today, what's the one thing you really hope people don't forget?
The future doesn't happen to you. You have to go build it. Everyone's waiting for permission or waiting for conditions to be perfect, but the founders who change the world are the ones who decide that today is the day to create something that never existed before. The Marketing Execution Podcast is produced by Growth Stage Marketing. We are on a mission to see your company reach wild success using marketing pods.
Too big, accept dreams. Catch the buzz and join the execution. Marketing Convo.
Thank you for listening and being a part of the marketing execution movement and community. To learn how growth stage marketing clients reach more buyers and drive business impact, go to growthstage.marketing. That's growthstage.marketing.